Man, you guys are nerds. I love it.
And then Victor will play it out with a sax riff.
Do your thing, Alex.
Jason, if you want nerds, I can give you the dimensions inside a Slant 6 from a Chrysler.
Wow. Well, consider me impressed.
Come on, I've got 2 of the Valiants that they're in, so I kind of need to know how the motor is if I'm rebuilding it.
Oh, yeah, this is the part where we talk. Hello, everybody.
Watermelon.
Hello, Jason, how are you?
I'm excellent. How are you, Stuart?
Cantaloupe.
I'm feeling rather good. A little warm. It was 30 degrees Celsius today.
Excellent.
All I've got to say to you two nerds is 42. That's all I'm saying.
It's 30 degrees Fahrenheit.
42 Celsius? What?
No,
Right.
no, Victor, what is 6 times 7?
There we go.
And how do you learn to fly? You fall and forget to hit the ground.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are in YouTube, you can see a link to Zoom. You can actually join there if you'd like. If you are an attendee here and watching us talk and wondering how all these people showed up in a Office Hours, Chris, it doesn't help when you put up text while I'm talking. So anyway, don't do that again. If you, because it throws me off. So the big thing, I'm just going to take a little break here. For the panelists, when I do the announcements, you can't do anything. Don't look sideways. Don't do anything. Like it's just a distraction, and I'm trying to do something off the top of my head. So if you wonder how these, I'm going to reset myself now. If you wonder how these panelists all got here, they got here early. So you have to have a good mic, good audio, good video, and be here by 6:40 Pacific Standard Time. We open the doors at 6. I can't promise anything from 6 to 6:40. We just kind of chit chat and we check our systems, have some tea and coffee, and kind of work through our process as we get ready for the show. From 6:40 on, we do somewhere in between 6:40 and 6:43. We will start doing mic checks, and those mic checks is pretty much the end of when we're going to add people to the panel. Now, we would love to have you. If you think you have something to add to this conversation, we keep on trying to add great voices and people who have a ton of experience to the conversation. So if you think you have something to add, we'd love to have you join us and be part of this conversation, part of the panel, and share your knowledge with everybody. So anyway, we'd love to have you there. At 7 o'clock, we start the general discussion. 7 to 8 is a general discussion. 8 to 9 is usually something specific. Mondays are kind of a wild card. Tuesdays are audio. Wednesdays are video. Thursdays are kind of another wild card, but a lot of times we bring in some artists there. And Fridays are more about production process. And then Saturdays are education. Talk about online education. Today, we're going to be talking about Atmos. We just saw that Blackmagic is now supporting Atmos in Resolve 17 completely. So the engine, everything is there. So you don't need anything more than that to do it, as well as the AirPods and a lot of other things. We're starting to see Atmos show up everywhere. So we're just going to have an informal conversation about what that means and how we get into it as creators. One of the commitments that we have in this group is not only to answer each other's questions, but really prepare ourselves as a group for the future. What interesting. So we paying a lot of attention to surround, both surround and as well as HDR production, AR, those types of things as well. So we're all going to kind of work on that. So anyway, tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about vision. Thursday, we're going to talk about multilingual streaming. Friday, we're going to talk about building, remote kits that we send out to folks. And then again, Saturday is education. So that's what we have coming up and what we have planned there. Now, if you like this, if you like what you're seeing here and you say, well, I'd like to share this with other people, bring other people into it, use the link that I just put into Makana. Don't use your own link. You'll come back as yourself. There'll be lots of people. You'll be replicating. So use that one there. And a reminder that, the questions that you put in right now is what drives the show. The show is based on your questions. If you have questions about Atmos, make sure to Atmos : so we know to keep it for the second hour. But otherwise, we depend on you as the viewer, as the attendee, to ask the questions to keep us moving forward. So anyway, Bill, do we have We got a couple questions
We
stacked
got
up.
quite a few questions. Yeah, we could always use more, but we've got some. We're going to start with Christian Turi out of London, who asks, Alex, what is your wish list for the Apple Silicon event? What do pros expect or want from Apple Silicon?
Go ahead, Mickey, and then Jason.
Sorry, I just want just housekeeping. I want to hand over to Con.
There you go. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, from a strictly professional standpoint, I would say it's quite simple. Faster, much faster, using professional AV workflows, faster. Better battery life, sure, but honestly, pros don't really care about that. At the end of the day, it's all about speed.
Yeah, I think that I don't think pros have a high expectation set for the first iteration of Silicon. I think that we're expecting to see something working. It'll be great to have some laptops that we can use when we travel to, I don't know, check email. Like I don't really care whether I know as a pro, I don't expect to move to Silicon for another year or two. So I'm glad to see it coming out. I do think it will end up being faster and more scalable, but I don't have any expectation of it being that way when we out of the gate. Now, if they do that and show us that, I'll be excited. But I don't expect that. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think most of the early word in the Final Cut Pro 10 community, and that's important in this respect because it's one of the pro apps that Apple uses their processor speed to demo on, and I'm hoping to see a little mention of that today. But the system is already really fast, and the system already works. I edit in 10 on a laptop professionally. That's really what I mostly do for a living. And it's already pretty fast and fluid, but this tells me that they're still building for the future and things are going to only get better and faster, which makes me relax and know that I can stay where I am with the things that I use every day to make my living, and it's just going to improve. So that always feels good.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Oh, there we go. I just had to make sure I was in sync. Are we expecting it actually to be an ARM processor or Apple coming up with their own processor? And will it be a RISC style processor like the PowerPC was?
All right, go ahead, Jason.
Calling what Apple does an ARM processor to me is a miscategorization. Although it's built by the same people that do the fab, when they say Apple Silicon, they're not just throwing their brand on it. It really is a completely different process.
And I think that one of the things that this is going to allow Apple to do is build into the processors exactly what they need, largely to support media production. So for us as creators and as also people as customers, what you're going to end up with is silicon that is driven more and more and more towards kind of graphics processing and everything else that's all totally integrated by the OS, by the hardware. That's going to be very hard to compete with, and when Apple was a smaller little company and they had this little outside way of doing it, it probably wouldn't have meant anything. But at the scale that they're working at now, I think that it's going to be very hard to compete with them completely controlling their entire destiny, where they're not sharing technology with other people. They have the technology. They're able to fully integrate the OS with the hardware at every level, from creation to people watching it on their screens. That integration, should not be underestimated. It is going to create a huge separation between, Apple users and everybody else over time. Not right now, but it's just going to be very hard to compete with that level of vertical market. And so I think eventually Apple's big competitor is antitrust, but there's no one else that's able to deal with what they're doing, just because they're at a scale that is very hard to get to any other way. And so I think that's going to be their biggest problem in the next decade is at some point it becomes dominant, and that's going to be the real challenge for them. Go ahead, TJ, and then Bill.
The processors that they're making for the Macs is an ARM-based processor. The test devices they were sending out to people earlier this year were a variant of the A14 chip that is in the iPhone.
Bill?
And we have to remember, this is kind of a Kleenex thing. It's a brand name, and it's also became an industry standard. I think ARM is a little bit the same way. The acronym was original Advanced Risk Instruction Set Machine. RISC is a thing that everybody can use, that reduced instruction set. And so I think when people say ARM processor, there's a little confusion. Are they talking about ARM Holdings, the company, or are they talking about the way the chip works? Whether Apple manufactures it or not, it is a RISC-based processing system they're doing in Apple silicon.
Stephen, and then Stuart, and then David.
Yeah, to go down a quick geek rat hole on this is ARM is an architecture and a set of instructions, and there's a way to expand them. Since Apple knows what areas of their code run slowly, they can go into the actual machine code and optimize it. There's been a whole bunch of talk here at Cal, some of the people that have seen it, is they've done a whole bunch of stuff with optimizing arrays and look ahead in arrays. So for Final Cut, this could just change everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, is that when you're building the hardware and the software and the OS and the consumer devices, the ability to tie these all together is profound, and I don't think people are really getting their head around that when they're worried about silicon. It's going to be a big deal. Stuart, and then David, and then Jason.
That vertical integration you mentioned a few minutes ago. At the moment, NVIDIA and AMD are battling away, creating best GPUs. Where can we expect Apple to be getting their GPU, especially for the Pro machines? And it better be good, otherwise it's going to get spanked the way Intel's does.
The advantage that they have is they have the OS and the hardware and the so they're going to build it themselves, the GPUs. But those things are going to, they don't. Well, the problem that NVIDIA and AMD have is that they have to make those generalized. It makes it's a very inefficient process, And so when you have, by Apple moving everybody to metal, it means that they can shift the hardware below it at any point in time, because it's now been disconnected from a direct write. So that's going to be, it can allow them to be much more efficient, because they're not. Again, there's a huge amount of inefficiency with modularity. There's a lot of choice with PCs and everything else, because you can pull these things out and put those things in, but that creates an inefficiency that Apple is not going to have to deal with 5 years from now. David, and then Jason, and then we'll move on. We're talking this to the ground.
As an old chip guy living in Silicon Valley, I can tell you that the secrecy around Apple, there's kind of a back channel as well. And for instance, I sat down at the bull riding event, and the guy next to me was one of the chip guys out of Apple. And they have 1,000 people in the chip group working on this stuff. But when you look at that ARM core, it's a real universal thing. It's a ton of registers with a reduced instruction set, but you don't have to do much to the core. You can add a little bit of circuitry in the chip now around the core and get dramatic speed ups of things. It's always a revelation when you just put a good serial interface on a microprocessor. You get an instant 8 or 16-to-1 improvement in speed on that particular port. Now imagine taking 6 of those cores and adding 1 billion transistors around it with dedicated circuitry for things like Final Cut Pro and so on. The effect will be incredible, but when you look at the core itself, it'll be pretty much still standard.
Jason, and then Jeffrey, real quick. Both of you, real quick. We're going to move on.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify what I said initially. I wanted to make a very clean distinction. ARM is not ARM as in Intel versus Intel. ARM is a set of constraints, not a trademarked brand name. TJ, of course, is correct. I was just, this is one of these know your audience things, and I'm starting to see people get confused in that.
Right. Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
That was the biggest problem with Intel, was the fact that they ended up putting in the integrated graphics. And I think that by by Apple not having those integrated graphics inside the chip, putting it on a side chip, it's going to make everything work a lot better, a lot smoother, and they can innovate on one chip as opposed to 2 different types of chips.
Well, and they're also not dealing with the bus, to go back out to a card, and that's that without having to, go out of the bus to get to the card. There's a lot of efficiencies there. So, and again, you can build no one else has access to the creation apps, the consumer apps, and the OSs, as well as the hardware, and that just is a very, very, you know, highly competitive position to be in.
And the compiler.
Yep. Next question.
Excuse me. Eric Hull of Mount Vernon, Washington says, is there a security advantage in Zoom to forcing a local client use as opposed to just running in the browser?
Oh, the browser is just a horrible experience. That's the biggest problem. The browser is a horrible experience for a user on Zoom. Like it is okay, if you want to watch something horribly, then you can use the browser. If you're, you know, particular and you can't install it, sure, go ahead and use the browser. But I don't even think you can see grid view in the browser. I think you always see speaker view. It's you know, low quality, low frame rate. It's a horrible experience. Like no one should ever. I mean, I haven't turned it off, but I need to tell people over and over again, don't ever use that. Jason.
Yeah, there is one other. I mean, from a strictly security standpoint, you can't do PBK DF2 with individual unique keys with perfect forward secrecy in the browser because it simply won't tolerate it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I was going to say, in the browser, is it using HTTP or HTTPS? And then, of course, the same things that Jason said with security.
I'm pretty sure it's HTTPS, but mine isn't so much security as much as it is just that it's a horrible experience. Like I didn't really test it that much until recently, and then I just realized how bad it was. And so, you know, when we were doing a bunch of testing around multi spotlights and so on and so forth, none of that works, or none of it did work. And so we were just like, why are we doing this? Why would, you know? And so we're on that precipice of turning off the browser access just because it's just such a bad experience. I'd rather people not see it. Paul.
The biggest thing for me is that in the desktop version, as opposed to the browser, you can't have your TV or your flat screen as a second screen unless you run an HDMI cable to it from your laptop. But why didn't Zoom build that in so you could mirror to a larger screen like a TV? That seems so obvious.
It's just the browser is very limited in what you can do. So anyway, next question.
Moving on to A. Mitchell's in Washington. Did anyone see the Ken Burns interview on 60 Minutes this past weekend? What do you think of this kind of content development and storytelling method? And what's the effect of truly long-term projects like these and multiples at the same time? And he has links to the CBS News thing. He also notes Ken Burns is near the end of the episode and has a link to just the interview.
I didn't see it. One request for questions is to ask us specifically what the question is if we haven't seen it, because I have no idea what the Ken Burns thing was. So did anyone see the Ken Burns? Does anyone have a sense of what that?
I was getting ready for the shoot. My wife came in and said, Ken Burns is on 60 Minutes. And but then I didn't go because I was busy.
So when you ask questions, don't refer to something external that we have to watch in real time, because we're moving through these questions constantly. So if you want to repost that with a more specific, like this is what you're asking, then we can answer it. Go ahead, Stuart.
Can we also ask that the links not be to a subscription-based service, be to something that everybody can access?
Yep. Next question.
Ruben Marchena of Grand Rapids says, I purchased this gofanco HDMI CAT5e 6 extender with IR, 120 meters, to connect a laptop 100 feet away to my ATEMmini. The laptop does not see the unit. I test it with video out and it works. Could it be the signal is different or lower or too low for the computer to see?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the problem is that HDMI was never intended, even with Balin's, to go that far. I believe in the panel in the past, some people have had some luck with it. In my opinion, you really just shouldn't do that. You can go SDI or HDMI to SDI and then SDI to HDMI. Of course, you're going to lose two-way talking back to the cinema cameras. But also, yeah, go ahead.
It has to convert it to another signal to get that far. So there are HDMI extenders, but they're usually over fiber. They're over other things. What this is doing is basically pushing the HDMI signal over copper, and it just isn't. It's going to attenuate over distance. Stuart.
Got to ask, firstly, if Ruben's tried different resolutions on the output device, but reading the question, it almost reads as if he's using the extender to send across a network and plugging in at the computer with the network.
And that won't work.
Not with the HDMI.
Yeah, well, what those converters aren't converting it to Cat5. They are, into an Ethernet standard. They're just taking the signal and pushing it over copper. So they have to be those. So the first thing is make sure to connect those extenders to each other directly with a Cat5 cable, not go into a router. So that may be your issue as well. Next question.
Victor from here in the panel says, during the Blackmagic presentation yesterday, they were showing some of their effects. Wipes, is that star wipes? Do we see a star wipes? The group kind of laughs that stuff off. Why do manufacturers put these effects in the industry if the industry thinks it's tacky to use them?
Stuart and then Jason.
Because weddings. They buy the software, they buy the computers, they buy the cameras, and you will see that star wipe in a wedding video coming to a screen near you.
Yeah, Jason and then Sky.
Yeah, because it's cheap, because basically all that kind of fade is a Luma key. And, it's really, really easy. So more is better. That's our fallacy. And, we've been stuck with them since the 80s. So why stop now?
Yep, Sky.
Well, my theory is it's like the Corvette on the car lot. It's what brings you in. It's the flash. It's the fireworks.
The flash. I literally think it's just a nod to that you have to do it because there'll be a certain subset of people doing weddings and everything else that'll complain if you don't put it in. The one thing I will say is that what we saw yesterday, with the Blackmagic was a serious case of lack of impulse control. There was no reason to show those. You can put them in there, but there was no reason to show them or talk about them or anything else, as there wasn't a lot of, there were a lot of things in that I don't know. Did we know how long that thing ran? I left it an hour and a half. I was just like, wow, okay, I got to go back to work.
We left about 10 minutes before it finished.
Okay. All right. I just felt like it just dragged on. And I will say that screen shares as a keynote device is really painful. Like that, I didn't get that until I watched it, but I don't, that should have been videos that you put up afterwards as support of, you can check it out, but they should never do that again. I feel like that was a horrible idea of really demoing it in real time, for a keynote. Like, tell me what it is, but that keynote could have been 45 minutes to an hour and it would have been a lot better. And they could have shown us what that meant. They didn't need to walk us through it, or they didn't need to walk us through it in such detail. Something that was like 5 minutes could have been 1 minute of just the thing that's important. And you see that Apple does that pretty well as far as when they do demos, they're demoing just that key piece. But I think you rarely see them go, we'll see today, but you rarely see them go over 2 minutes, for a demo. And oftentimes it's much shorter, just to show you a little hint of that. Then you can have tons of support videos. If we're interested in that, that's great. But I really felt like that keynote was not one of the examples that I would use as a successful keynote in the era of COVID. Now, I will admit that that's replacing a launch cycle at IBC and NAB, and I have sat through the IBC and NAB press briefings for Blackmagic, and it's pretty much the same. So it's like a very long, drawn out process of like, when are we going to get to the point, And so I think it's a model that was predictable for them, but I feel like they could really tighten that up a lot. Go ahead, Victor and Jason, Sky.
So then, are cuts and dissolves the only acceptable forms of editing? And when should one use one versus the other? Noob here, have no idea.
What I will say there is that, so we like some of the other transitions because we use them technically. So he even showed one of those things where when they're doing color, when you're able to get every other square being the two different clips that you're comparing, that's actually really useful. What we do a lot of is split screen wipes, but we don't wipe all the way through on a show. We wipe halfway across or halfway up so that we can compare two frames together, and make sure that the live cameras are synced up and so on and so forth. So there's uses for some of those other wipes, but most of them I've never seen. And if I saw anyone actually use them in a show, I probably never hire them again, just because there's a lack of wisdom, but generally I would say that. And for me, it's just how it feels. If it's a soft transition to something, if we're trying to get to something, cross dissolves are pretty useful if you're trying to, if you're saying something that's boom, 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 you cut it. I don't dissolve very often in a live show because a lot of encoding doesn't work as well. So like a slow dissolve is horrible for a live stream. So I think as live streamers, we're leaning back towards dissolves a little bit, but for a long time we only did cuts because a cut would create a natural keyframe in the encoder. The encoder will drop an actual keyframe, and then everything goes. If you go slowly from one image to another, you actually sneak up on the encoder, and that's when you see things break up and everything else. And so, but the encoding has gotten much better over time, and so we don't have to do that as much. Go ahead, Jason, and then Sky, and then Bill.
I would also add, Victor, that dips are very common, especially logo reveals. Anything you do with a DVE with a wipe. Subject tracking, and this is more art than than a live presentation, but if you're doing a pan and you can match the pan to the wipe, personally as an artistic form, I'm not a huge fan of like the way that Star Wars did it, but whatever. John is immediately upset. Sorry, John. I'm sorry. It's just
Go ahead,
I guess
Sky.
it was in the 70s too. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to use Star Wars as a. You actually do understand this, Victor. It's musical. You do a transition from a riff to a melody, from a melody to a solo. So that's what a dissolve is, or that star wipe, or whatever that is. It's just getting you from one thing to another, and hopefully, creating a transition.
But I will say that I use dissolves sparingly. Either fade to blacks or dissolves very, very sparingly, and I cut almost everything, and then I only add dissolves where I think they would make a difference.
And
Bill?
just like musical riffs, they come and go. The style of them, depending on the appetite of the audience.
Yeah, good, Bill.
They can be used well and they can be used horribly, which is, I think, it's the same for me as fonts and emojis, right? Fonts, when Apple first did the original Mac and you had a choice of fonts other than the system ones, for a while we had ransom notes. People were throwing every font, every type of.
There was a whole magazine dedicated to that called Raygun.
It went
most of us are old enough to remember Raygun. It was just like, I don't care if you can read it. I don't care. It's a magazine. I don't care if you can read it. We're just going to use a bunch of different fonts.
But in the end, the people who are really skilled typesetters, all that variability became an industry that is very precise. And if you work with a good type designer, they will throw up 15 types that look to me exactly the same. And they are looking at how does the ligature between these two things that I have to use all the time, how did they do that in this font versus this font? So there's a high level of things. The other thing I think is similar to it was emojis. When Apple came out with those, and everyone went, this is going to be for kids and stuff like that. But I, at the time, was doing a whole series of episodes, and they were all in process. And I thought, if I just put the green check mark next to the ones who are finished, and then the yellow circle next to the ones that need something from somebody else, and the red square in front of the ones, I can just look at my screen and see exactly the status of everything I'm working on right now and what needs my attention first. So I took a thing that was not useful and made it hugely useful in terms of accelerating my workflow.
I will say, in a professional sense, I don't like a lot of these whiz-bang things, but anybody who texts with me back and forth will know that I love GIFs. I love, like this. Like it's kind of a constant. Like I think of something funny. I have a couple that are my go-tos, but I love animated GIFs. Go ahead, Greg.
The other thing is that in films, split screen is is working its way in. I've seen it in several pictures. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't really work. Wipe, I've seen wipes being used. But realistically, it just doesn't aesthetically work for me, and most of these effects are seen as gimmicky. They're seen as, kind of prosumer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Jason, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I'm with you, Alex. Love the GIFs. Not really a fan of the emojis. I feel like using an emoji twice, gauche.
Mickey, go ahead. One last word.
I just wanted to comment on what Greg was saying. Like usually when they use those wipes in feature films nowadays, it's more tongue-in-cheek kind of thing,
Right.
And they're trying to play to something like 80s nostalgia or whatever.
Yeah. Next question.
Ed Wilcox says, or Willock, I'm sorry, Valley College, New York. I haven't used Fairlight yet, but I was looking at their consoles today, and it seems like they're just extremely expensive control surfaces. Am I missing something? Does Fairlight require their interfaces, or do other interfaces work to bring in external audio? And he has a note, audio consoles, I should have specified.
Mickey?
Yeah, with Resolve, you don't have to use their own interfaces. With Fairlight within Resolve, you don't have to use their own interfaces. You could use any one you have. And then I've been reading up on reading the manual of Resolve because I've had to play around with it lately. And their manual states that the Resolve supports HUI and MCU compatible controllers. So MIDI controllers will work with it.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is so there's a couple things there just to kind of unwrap as far as hardware goes. One is that hardware puts the tools that you need as you're working at speed in front of you so that you can comfortably get to it. And that does make a difference. If you drove your car without a steering wheel, you can do it. You could put a bar there or something you can put, but there's reasons that thing, and where your car companies spend a lot of time figuring out where all your little buttons are going to go so they're not a distraction. And there's in the same way when you're mixing something, when you're building something, being able to pot something up or route something, or all those things are valuable to people to have that interface and to have something you can actually touch. That's why Victor got an X32 with a board instead of a rack. The rack has the same engine that the board does, but the interface makes a difference. And so there's one piece of it is that. The second piece of it is what hardware you put in there makes a difference to your client. And we should not underestimate how valuable that is that when you have a bunch of great hardware sitting in front of you, clients feel that the money is going somewhere. You can have a little laptop and do all the same things, but the clients are going to feel like, I don't think I should pay as much for this because they don't feel it. They don't feel that you're bringing infrastructure, and I see a lot of people underestimate that. They think, I can do all this stuff in my laptop or on my iPad or whatever, and then no one takes you seriously, And so, and what I have learned over time is a lot of times that hardware does make a difference. It does make a difference that I can grab onto something quickly. It does make a difference that it's not hidden behind some kind of interface or whatever, that I can just grab onto the hardware. So it does make a difference, but you do have to know that it looks a certain way to clients. And when you have a bunch of hardware that you're dialing up, for clients who may or may not understand what they're looking at, it does feel like their money's going somewhere as opposed to sitting behind you on a laptop. And go ahead, Jason. And then Greg.
For those who watched our coverage yesterday of the Blackmagic event, we gave them a really hard time for that small keyboard. And Fenwick made an excellent point, which is, I'm going to learn how to edit on a keyboard. And by the way, I'm all the way behind that. If you've ever edited photo, edited video live while somebody else is driving, going down the highway, which I've done a lot, it is absolutely a good thing to standardize so that you can do it wherever. I would add, though, that audio is not the same. It is not the same. It is not the same. I don't care what anybody says. It's not the same. With audio, I want a good control surface. And to answer his question, yes, Fairlight is a control surface. And by the way, Blackmagic bought them. They are very industry standard, but they're a company that predates Blackmagic.
You go, Greg, and then Ed.
Okay, well, I think central to his question is the fact that these things are in fact control surfaces and not consoles. There's a huge difference.
Yep.
It's not a mixer. Victor's is a console. It's not a control surface. It functions as a control surface.
Well,
that's not the design.
The reason that I brought that up is that the difference, though, between the X32 Surface that he has and the rack mounted version of the X32, both of them are both console, but one has a control surface and the other one, it's the same engine, but he still chose to get something with external controls. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it was that they just seem like they're very expensive control surfaces, and if there's other control surfaces that work, I don't discount having tactile control surfaces. I prefer to mix with something I can actually touch instead of doing like an iPad or a GUI on a screen. But I just couldn't see, and that's why I was wondering if I was missing something, if there was something to these specific control surfaces that made them special to justify that kind of cost.
That's right.
I mean, they look nice, but it's just
You should not underestimate. You should not underestimate looking nice, and you know, and in general, build quality is going to be different. You know, for a lot of these things. I mean, a BMW and a Hyundai get you both, you know, get you the same place. You know, it's, you know, or a, you know, it's that, but there's a build quality and a setup that different people prefer.
Right. It would be something if like you still need the cards though, so to do the processing and the computer. It would be something if they would have included the processing as part of the control surface so that it's unloading some of the load from your PC and from the cards. But it just didn't seem to do that. So I was just confused as to what's so special about you know, a $2,500 control surface with 12 faders. It just seemed a little I was hoping I was missing something, but clearly it doesn't seem that I am.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what components Blackmagic is using on their control surfaces, but like say, you know, with Avid controllers and with, you know, SSL boards and all that, you're paying for proper like PNG 100mm faders, which feel really good. And you know, a lot of these things, when especially comparing using control surfaces with GUI control, it's a lot about feel. Like, yeah, I want to feel the faders. I want to, you know, I want to have really good tactile control. And if they're using nice, you know, encoders and nice faders, then it might be worth it.
It's like, it's a lot of those little things. And again, it's somewhat, if you're in a studio and you've got audio engineers and everything else. I mean, I remember because it was cheap, we bought a bunch of Alesis mixers. I remember back in the day, and the build quality on the faders was so bad that we just were like, we're never going to do this again. You know, like, you know, and it didn't matter. It changed, but it changed how I viewed it because the feature set was all the same. You know, like the feature set between a Zoom recorder and a Sound Devices equals recorder, what you check off is the same. There's a big difference between those pieces of hardware. like as far as the quality and the build and everything else and how long they'll last and what they'll sound like. And so those are, you know, so the build quality should not be underestimated either. Go ahead, Jason, and then Ed and Greg and Jesse.
Yeah, it occurred to me, Ed, that it's worth mentioning. Fairlight is only used after the fact. You can't use it with ATEM. You can't use it for live unless I am sorely mistaken. And with respect to build quality, my Allen and Heath faders are like nothing. I mean, they are absolutely spectacular. That's why it costs what it costs. You know, that is a tangible thing, and I think that control surface is absolutely worth what it costs.
And what I will say is that what I do know about Blackmagic is they make everything as cheap to pay for, cheap to buy as they possibly can, or inexpensive, not cheap. So I do listen to that filter, like, oh, I really want to touch that board and see how it see how it feels, because if they're charging $2,500 for it, there's a reason that they're doing that. It's because it's as low as Grant could make it to make it available to, you know, what he's doing. I mean, that's just generally his operating procedure. Greg, and then Ed, and then Jesse.
Yeah, and that same 2,500 wouldn't buy you one channel on a Harrison or an SSL,
right?
You know, so and you Ed, you remember when the Pro Tools, what was it, Mickey? What was the Icon, when the Icon came out?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean it's swept, and it was huge and it was beautiful, but all, you know, most pro mixers that I knew said, well, this isn't a console. This is just a surface. But I think that's changing a little bit now, because there's so much power inside the software, you know, that it's now becoming kind of usable. It doesn't sound the same, but it's you know, it's becoming usable.
And Greg, your audio is coming apart a little bit here and there. There's a little buzz or a little breakup. I'm not sure exactly what.
Replug.
Might want to replug it. Ed, and then Jesse, and we'll move on.
Yeah, I guess so another thing Mickey just made me think of too is, are these control surfaces going to be usable for other applications? Like, that's, I think, you know, being someone who does a lot of freelance work, yeah, I guess if they made a desktop one, and that's what I was really looking at, was the Fairlight desktop console. So that implies to me that it's going to be moved around, not just mounted permanently, because they do have a install version. So can I take that and use that with some other audio application and have control, or not? Because for me, having some more universal type control surface that I can bring with me that's using MSC or OSC or some other control protocol is more valuable than something I'm only going to be able to use with Fairlight.
Yep. I doubt it. Go ahead, Jesse.
I think in this case, and with a lot of MIDI controllers, the assumption is that the setup will be sort of customized. And in the recent move to Atmos in that world, I'm guessing that Blackmagic is assuming that people will be using RMU setups, or they might just be focused on the video aspect of Resolve and not really touching the audio very much. So I'm guessing that's why the MIDI controller is separate, other than the price point, separate than the audio I/O.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. Next question.
Okay, we're moving to Tony Mobley's question. Question for Dansby. Have you done voice instruction on Zoom or other streaming video platforms? And if so, have you run into any issues? Please talk about what worked if you have. Dansby, are you tuned in?
Yes, I have. I've used a lot of different ones. But the main problem with Zoom, as you guys have talked about many, many times, is one person, if I use my piano and I'm playing it and talking and we're all talking at the same time, it goes in and out. But if we're just talking like we're talking right now, it's great. It's great. I haven't had any real issues with it. But if you're using an instrument and talking, try to do the same thing, there's problems with it.
That's when you have to start. What we found is that you have to start using loopback once you get into that, where you're doing an instrument and a person. You have to figure out a way that you're going to reroute the audio. So when we bring bands in, that becomes the thing that we have to do. Is you've got a couple different interfaces coming into the computer, and then you use loopback to reroute the channels to merge them together to provide it to Zoom in the way that it needs to get it. It now sums all the inputs, so that might be good, might be bad. Victor has found it to be challenging. So anyway, but that's the thing to think about there. Next question.
Dan Huber from Erie, Pennsylvania asks, Alex spoke yesterday about moving office hours away from web conferencing providers to just streaming. What streaming solution would you rely on?
Most likely, if we move to that, we'd probably go to YouTube to start with, just because it's easy for us. And it's, in my opinion, as far as a public CDN, it's the highest quality version. Now, our company has an Akamai account. So if I didn't feel like there were that many people watching and it wasn't going to cost us a ton of money, I'd be tempted to use Akamai for it, but I don't. I think it probably would start adding up. I would get in trouble. So YouTube is probably the one that I would probably lean on, because a lot of people are looking for it for the VODs. They listen to it later, that type of thing. Now because of our experience over this fall, we are thinking about, well, what if we could use a dedicated app that would allow us to have much higher quality audio and video and be able to talk about stuff, that would give us the opportunity to do higher quality video and audio and than what we can get on YouTube. Things like HDR and surround and that type of thing in the show. So those are things that we may start out to be specials rather than the everyday thing. But we're kind of thinking about that process now that we understand the pipeline. So but in the near term, my expectation would be, if we moved it to streaming, that we would put it all in YouTube. Just because I think it's the most stable, highest quality public CDN that we can get, that we don't have to pay for. Jason.
Just along those lines, a quick production note. Apple or Google had mentioned that the new iPhones would actually support HDR in YouTube when they announced iOS 14. They pushed that yesterday, I believe. So you can now actually do that on I believe the 11s and the 12s, maybe just the 12s.
That's great. That's great. Next question.
Moving on to Sky Gleason from here in the panel in Seattle. I'm thinking I need to build a temporary ceiling grid in a home kitchen for studio lighting and cameras. Minimal budget and minimal space. Would 80/20 be a good resource, or what is the best choice of photo studio expandable rods?
It's for me now. My setup is stuff I went to the hardware store and got plumbing to do it. I would not recommend that. It creates a bunch of threading problems that is not a good idea. That turned out to be kind of a nightmare for me. And it's a safety hazard. Like if the earth started shaking, the first place I would not be is underneath my rig. What I will say though is that what you're looking for is speed rail. So speed rail is the thing that's the answer. And then Hollinger, I believe, is the name of the company that makes all the fittings for it. So you get the fittings. The fittings are the most expensive part. The speed rail itself is cheap, but the fittings will add up. And they have hundreds and hundreds of it's Holland. Is it Hollander? Hollander, I think, is the name. They make all the fittings for it, and it's like an erector set. I built so many grids and structures and everything else with speed rail. But it is it's the more industrial version of a Tinker Toys. You know, the 8020 is going to be a lot more expensive. This is going to be, again, what you're really paying for are all these different fittings, and there's a lot of them. And if you want to talk about some of those, we can. You can back yourself into a corner with these fittings if you don't get the right ones. So, we can maybe have a discussion sometime about speed rail, but it is you have to be careful about, for instance, when you butt things together, when do you do T's, when do you do X's? There's a bunch of things that you have to kind of think through and really design it before you start building it. But then you'll buy the fittings, and again, the fittings will be the thing that costs you a bunch of money. The speed rail itself is pretty cheap. So
what's the tensile strength? I mean, if I've got a 5 foot
more than
space,
you can put on, if you structure it with the four corners, I mean, I have put hundreds of pounds,
wow,
on it. Like this is not I mean, once the main thing is you have four stable structures, and then in a room like what you're talking about there, I did that with my last office. I just ran it up the corners. I just ran speed rail up the corners. And then you build a grid across the top. And then what I did is you push the grid. They have these squares with pads, and you push them into the wall.
Yep.
And then it keeps it from rocking. And as soon as you do that, and there's little flat ones that you can just set on the ground, but you push them into opposite walls, and then it just becomes rock solid. And at that point, it's an incredible amount of strength. Especially if you're building a grid that's gridded at every. I don't know. I mean, I've hung from them, myself. Like just as by accident once. My chair went out from under me while I was moving a light. But they have a lot of. That's not the issue. I mean, this is real piping. So I mean, I'm sure that there's a limit, but you're not going to find it with today's lights and cameras and everything else. You're not going to find that weight limit to the grid.
Exactly.
as you build
again,
it.
as I'm doing this in phases, this is I'm going to say a temporary, but it's a phase one, and it's limited budget, and expediency is like we've got like 4 shows lined up already in this month, so it's like, and we got permission from Sam. And so now we're moving in.
But we just buy them. We buy the rail itself as 20-foot sections with you have a chop saw. You just cut it. You measure cut, stick it in there. It will take a day to put it up, but it takes a couple days to figure out what it should be.
So I'll reach out to Eric up in Mount Vernon, see if he wants to help help build something.
Okay, we're gonna speed. We're in speed round now, so we'll go around real quick as I come to you. Bill, and then Jeffrey, and then Stuart.
I'm just going to say, whatever you attach it to in the ceiling, make sure that you go back and do a really good job of putting into something stable. That's your weakest point, and whatever you hang on it is going to.
And we don't hang it anywhere because we're using the four corners as the
so you're going to put it on poles? Okay.
Yeah.
Just pay attention to your shots. Make sure you got clean shots.
Yeah, Jeffrey and Stuart.
Yeah, looking at some of these Hollander joints, it looks like you can also detach it really easily. So if you need to take it down and put it up in situations like somebody's kitchen, that would work well.
Yeah, it really is something we put these up for temporary stages. It's something that's very easy to put up and take down. It's not, and you'll keep all the parts. You just have to keep on buying to refit it for different size lengths. You have to put it there anyway.
I just continue to be overwhelmed that all this consulting that I could never afford, that I'm getting the best consulting globally. It's just
your bill's coming, Sky.
Yeah, exactly. Stuart and then Stephen.
Just for anyone using the portable extendable rods, grab a stud finder and go across your wall and find the studs inside the wall, and make sure that the rods go across between those, because if you put it straight up against plaster and you extend it too hard, you'll crack the plaster and your rod will fall.
That was exactly
But
one
if
of
you
my
can pull the
solutions.
plaster out, like what Sky's talked about, and mount to the frame, it'll be safer.
Yeah, and we only use this to stabilize, and these are like little, it's so close, we're only extending about 3 inches, and then the pad is big, and that's what you want to make sure of, and it shouldn't be holding any weight or really doing anything other than keeping it from vibrating. And I've used them many times without any damage, but all 4 sides somewhere get pushed, just keep it from moving around. So then
Done and
Eric,
done.
real quick.
Jeffrey, did you put the link in the Makana?
Go ahead, Stephen, and then
I
Eric.
can.
Yeah, because he says the pieces are expensive, but you don't use that many, and don't think you can use electrical conduit and substitute it for the speed rail. That's a fail too. So,
and you will have, it's not many, but it'll add up to, like, just to put it in perspective, it'll be $500 to $1,000 of little connectors. Like, I'm just managing your expectations. It's not, each piece is $30, but you're going to buy, you're going to buy 10 or 15 or 20 of these little pieces. That's what adds up. It's just a bunch of little pieces. They're not, each one of them, you're like, oh, that's not that bad. But when you buy them all, there's a bunch of them. But once you have them, and you can reuse them over and over and over again. You're not committing to anything. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, I hope, Sky, that you got that shopping list, because I kind of missed it. But the goal certainly would be minimal modification of the location.
Well, this would have no modification of the location. The way these work is they sit inside of that. The only problem you're going to have is over where that, the one that I'm worried about mostly for you, Sky, is over the cabinets. You don't have any weight bearing area there. So that part I don't quite have understood. And I'm going
to probably have to come out right at counter height, and so I might have some poles like hiding behind the refrigerator in the corners.
We'll play with that a little bit. I might try to get a couple people on the show, and we'll have a conversation about it.
And I did a LiDAR of it with the iPad last night.
Nice.
So
well, then take that LiDAR into SketchUp and build a nice clean one, and then that's a good basis. So
okay,
that's your next homework. All right, next question.
Sir, yes, sir. May I have another?
Next question.
Guy Blank of Bruges, Belgium says, audio. Love the audio quality of office hours, making daily listening and watching so enjoyable. Based on the few times using mics and wearing masks was addressed, I wonder what the panel's thoughts are on the Masked Singers shows, and how real is that audio?
Go ahead, Sky.
My wife and mother-in-law watch that show religiously. I kind of hold my tongue, but I can't imagine they would pay a star to be in that show that often. My cynical side is it's a stunt double in there, and it's all just voiced over until the star is revealed in the end. But that's just my cynical producer being in Hollywood.
Good, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'm guessing they pre-recorded the songs for singing, and then when they're on stage, they could actually be stunt doubles because they're masking their voices with high pitch or low pitch sounds. So you don't really need to. You can really compress and gate the heck out of something if you end up modulating it at the end. So
as Roscoe pointed out, that lip sync is easy behind a mask. So there you go. All right. But yeah, I haven't watched it at all, so I have to admit my TV experience isn't very deep anymore.
Just
next
one
question.
Word. Don't.
Next question.
James Babbitt from here in San Diego. Based on the experience of ATEMmini users, which model, Basic Pro or Pro ISO, would you purchase now?
I guess I would say it would depend on what I'm doing. Go ahead, Jason.
Nope. Alex's answer is absolutely right. I would say the Pro ISO, if you don't know what you're doing and can afford it, is hard to go wrong with. But I mean, I have all three, and there are bespoke purposes for all three of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're using it as a presentation interface or an interface, you're going to go into Zoom or you're going to go into meetings or you're going to do something and you already have all the other encoding and how you're going to put it together and everything else, then I think that I think the Mini by itself is perfect. And I'm really glad they made a $299 version that doesn't have everything else, that you can just do. I think that every person, every salesperson, every person that's doing, all of these other, bits and pieces should absolutely have one of these devices so that they can just jump between things as they're talking in a meeting. But they don't need the streaming capability, and they don't need the ISO capability. So I think it just depends on what you're doing there. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I got the ISO because I wanted to get into STEM multi-channel post mixing. But if you're doing live stuff and you're going off the fly and you don't want to have multi-view monitors, go as cheap as possible and save yourself a few dollars.
Yep. Next question.
Robert Laney of Las Vegas says, good morning. How do I get friends invited to office hours? I have a few tech colleagues who would really appreciate this forum.
Yeah, I'll put it in the link. I'll put the link in here again. There it is. So just send them to that link that I just put into Makana, and they can sign up for themselves. All right, next question.
Lucas Herzogs of Maine says, just to clarify, do we know if the Fairlight desktop console is usable with other DAWs? That's one of the great things that the S-Series surfaces from Avid. Every Yukon compatible DAW works with it.
Mm-hmm.
I
don't think we know for sure. Go ahead, Victor.
Mickey mentioned that it's MTU, so that covers quite. Was that right, Mickey?
I mentioned that Fairlight can see Mackie control and HEI, but not the other way around.
Ah, very
Yeah,
interesting.
I don't
Thank
know
you.
about their control surfaces.
Thank
they
you.
can be used with other DAWs.
Right. Next question.
Jonas Dettel of Rottlingen wants to know, could somebody please explain the difference between cut and edit, and when do you do what?
I'm assuming this is in cut and edit in Resolve. I think that's the specific question there. So there's a cut page and then there's an edit page. Go ahead, Chris.
I think in general, I see the biggest advantage of cut, and I barely use Resolve, as Alex will tell you. The cut page is great for somebody who's not an editor but needs to edit, and the edit page is somebody who's really an editor. And the way I see that as being the biggest benefit, my understanding also, is that I can give the cut page to a producer and say, hack together the parts you think you need, and then give it to me. And then I'm going to go into the edit page and I'm going to finesse it. And it may very well be that at the end of the cut page, you love what you have, in which case, kick it out and be done with it.
Yeah, I think a cut page is a really good place for an assembly. Just to kind of assemble, what you think you're going to use quickly without getting into the weeds of the rest of the piece.
Yes.
And then the edit, you're going to finish everything in the edit. Well, you're going to finish the edit in the edit, and then you're going to finish it in color, and then you're going to, there's all, that's what all those pages. It is the pages are kind of in the order that they kind of expect you to work. so you're going to go from, you're going to bring your media in, and then you're going to go to the cut page and the edit page, and then then you're going to go to color, and then Fairlight, and then delivery. I think that's the order that they have it in. Sky, and then Mickey.
Well, again, we're inheriting the history of our post-production process. So you would bring the film in, you would process it, and then yes, the edit is exactly what you just said. It's a simplified setup without all of the confusion of what you really want to do when you start doing the nuances of layering. And unlike Final Cut, you would layer up your videos because you want to test things out. So yes, cut is just a simplified version of the edit.
Mickey, and then Mike, and then Bill, and Greg.
Yeah, I'm not sure how relevant this is with the current workflow that Resolve is trying to push. But cut has always been there, even when there wasn't any editing features in Resolve. Cut was where colorists would conform the EDL to the raw material. So just maybe have that mindset in terms of how they develop those pages.
Right. Mike?
Yes, so I was an editor years ago, and most on reality shows, and a buddy of mine is on Naked and Afraid cutting that. And I asked him, I was like, how do you, take care of all that blurring, And he said, we don't. He said the story editors do. So apparently on that show, the story editors do a very simplistic rough cut, but they do all the blurring. And I was asking him, is there software that does that motion tracks that blur? Because I used to have to do it manually, and it was a pain in the neck.
No, there's a lot of software that does that pretty well. Bill, and then Greg, and we'll move on.
Just in terms of the language in general, not looking at Resolve specific language, a cut and an editor are the same thing. I mean, somebody says, I got a new cut of the show. That means you've got a new edit of the show, and vice versa.
Yeah.
This whole thing about language being specified, they blew up because project and event means something new in Final Cut. These are equivalent terms in the universe that have been specifically put on a piece of software that works a little differently than all the rest.
Yep. Go ahead, Greg.
I think cut would also be useful if you have the luxury of having an assistant, or you're working in teams,
right,
where somebody pre-cuts and then ships the trim material.
Yep. Next question.
Mike Burns from Spokane. In the panel, I'm getting a lot of room echo with my Podcaster and Rode mic. Any software that can knock that down during a live stream? I don't want to switch to a dynamic mic. I like my big bottom. I own Audio Hijack. Any thoughts on what I can use?
Yeah, go ahead, Nikki.
I would go with treating your room as opposed to putting a Band-Aid. Not the answer you want, but that's what I would suggest.
Well, and also the Rode Podcaster shouldn't have that much room noise. I mean, I think it could be a proximity thing as well. I mean, if you're right up on the problem with the Rode Podcaster in general is it's not very sensitive. So if you're very far away from it, I mean, if you're more than like 2 inches from it, you're probably going to have a problem. Like it is, the Rode Podcaster wants you to be definitely within 3 inches of the mic. And I would say 1 to 2 inches. It's so insensitive. It's so insensitive. The Rode Podcast. I had one, and I couldn't. There were two problems with it.
One, your anniversary.
Yeah, there were 2 problems with it. Is number one is it wasn't very sensitive, and number 2 that the shape of it just really bothered me, and so I just couldn't. I couldn't get up. Anyway, just couldn't.
Yeah, but Alex, they make their own Pelican case where the mics fit in beautifully.
Yeah. It's not I don't. Anyway, so Jeffrey.
Right.
Real quick, Jeffrey, can you hear it?
Sorry, I had another program getting away. There are some programs out there. WLM makes a noise reduction program. I was trying to find the name of it as I was going, but I haven't gotten to that far yet. But in some of the live streams software have noise reduction programs in them.
But we'll always tell you that filtering is never going to turn out well. Like, if you don't, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't figure out a way that you can get a clean audio in, it's always going to feel weird. I mean, I think that's what we heard a lot yesterday, actually, in that Blackmagic thing was a lot of processing on some of those presenters. And it didn't, it didn't live up to what a keynote should sound like, in my opinion. All right, next question.
Todd Harder in West Palm Beach, Florida says, I've been having problems getting my output levels correct on ATEMmini Pro. Using Zoom, GoToMeeting, Teams, all platforms handle audio levels differently, input level interface. Is there a suggested output level from ATEM to start with?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I mean, typically you would need to tailor fit your mix to your platform, whatever distribution platform you're going for, or whatever web conferencing platform you use. So it will change. There's no one size
it's not only changing between platforms, it's changing based on what settings you have on that platform. And Zoom, whether you have original sound on or off, or some of the music tools, all those things will change your how loud it is. So those are things that you kind of have to play with. It's hard. There's not really, and the hard part is you can't see it. So it's, someone on the other side just has to, we get ours tied pretty close within a couple dBs of each other, but that's pretty unusual for any other Zoom meeting. Most Zoom meetings don't show up with their own meter, so it would be good. I mean, I do think that if anyone at Zoom is listening, or anyone that's related to people in Zoom and listening, is that the meter, having a meter built in, like you could just turn on, would probably change a lot, be life-changing for a lot of Zoom meetings, of having a window that does what Mickey's does. And I guess now with Zaps, you could probably build one that you could build something that would just be a meter that always popped up and let you know what let everybody know what their volumes are. People would find their way there, I think. Go ahead, Chris.
Can we get somebody to help make a Zap, and let's call it Mickey's meter?
Mickey's meter. Yeah.
That'd be
Let's
awesome.
call, oh man, we should call it Mickey's meter. That would be perfect. All right.
Come on, you gotta know somebody, Alex. Let's do this. Mickey's
Okay,
meter.
let's look into the building Mickey's meter. That would be amazing.
I'm good at
All right.
branding.
All right, we're gonna shift gears now to Atmos. And the goal for today is to just have a kind of a general discussion about it. We're gonna try to bring some folks in the future to really talk about Atmos and Vision and really dig into it. But I don't want to bring them in when we're still getting our wits about us. So we want to make sure we use up their time where a lot of us have that. But we have some people here that know a fair bit about it. And so we want to kind of have that, discussion. So Atmos is, of course, I don't know how long has Atmos been a thing? Do we know when it began? I mean, this is the evolution of surround, right? And that's been happening for quite some time.
2012, 2013, I think.
Yeah. So Atmos is relatively new. And Mickey, do you want to talk a little bit about what Atmos actually is?
Ooh, okay.
I mean,
No
I can
pressure.
too. I mean, you can just raise your hand if you. But go ahead, Mickey, and let people know what.
So yeah, Atmos as is an object-based mixing format. Object-based means instead of during the creation stage, like in the mixing stage, instead of telling a sound to go out of the speaker or go out of the speaker in your surround setup, it's telling the sound to be at this certain place in the room. Now that has an advantage in terms of it can scale from room to room. Like it can scale from a big theatrical system where you have 100, 200, 300 speakers around you, and it can also scale down to to binaural headphones,
or even stereo, right?
Or even stereo, because it just gives instructions that this sound should come out here, not a specific speaker.
Right.
And in addition to that, it also adds in what they call the height channels, which are speakers that are up above in the ceiling. Previous formats only had them like around you when we're mixing, typically at ear level around you. The height channels are above you, so that's another dimension. You're not only panning in 2D, left, right, forward, and rear, but also you have the height as well.
Go ahead, Greg. Okay. I can't hear you, Greg.
Couldn't unmute for some reason. But the thing about Atmos is it's a hybrid system. It employs a 7.1.2 if you want to, straight linear track system, which is a 7.1 stereo plus the 0.2 is there's a stereo overhead pair. Okay, so that operates just like a normal, as a normal mix would. Then you have up to 118, I think it is, something like that. 118 objects. I'm sorry?
Is it 128 or 118? I don't know. 128.
128. Okay. 128 objects that can be moved anywhere. Okay, and it's a question of sequentially panning them between the stations where it's going.
Right.
Okay, so you don't pan something from one place to the destination. You have to pan the route.
Well, and the thing one of the reasons we're talking about this is because now we have Apple AirPods that you can hear a lot of this. So that's your base entry level solution, for this. But we also have sound bars and we have all kinds of other things that consumers are pulling in. The other side of that is also that Resolve now is incorporating the entire engine into what they're doing, which means that for the first time, with only Resolve Studio, you can actually build, a full Atmos mix, which has been difficult in the past. And so and for us as media creators, there's this moment where there's suddenly a lot of consumers that are looking for something interesting, and there's suddenly a low bar to get in but what's missing is us knowing how to do it, and us understanding what it is. And we have the advantage as a group that we can learn this together quickly and be, one of the few groups of people that actually know how to do this, and at the beginning of a wave, there's a lot of opportunity. There's usually the available talent dries up very, very fast in most of these things. And so it means that there's a huge opportunity for us to be able to go to some consumers and say, or some customers and say, hey, I can, we can do these great experiences. And before it had to be like, well, they have to have a surround system at home. So how big is that market? Now the market is every person with an iPhone and AirPod Pros is the market for, so if you're doing when you want to think about doing your promo videos and all those other things, having the ability to take advantage of this is not trivial. It's a real opportunity to sell something new to your clients. So Jesse, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just a comment that Atmos can include beds and objects in the sense that the beds are predefined channel maps that don't require Dolby metadata, and objects are the ones that actually kind of float around in space in between speaker virtual sort of places, and that's not necessarily defined by the number of speakers you have in the room.
And an example of that might be that you might have a bed of a forest, with some rain or something like that you recorded, and you hear the rain and everything else, but the bird that flies around or something else that's walking around is an object that would sit over top of that bed, that would interact with it, that you might put in separately and animate it around. But that way you don't want to animate the whole forest. You would record that as a bed in that sense, or build it.
What's that movie that you really like, Alex? Small World or something like that as a good example of natural
Tiny World really took, Tiny World is a pretty good example of vision and Atmos in general. It's Apple on Apple's. If you want to hear some more natural use of quote unquote natural use of Atmos and vision. If you have the capability of looking at it, it's an amazing execution. But I'm pretty sure that Apple went to Plimsoll and just gave them all the money to do that. It's an incredible high budget natural film. Bill and then TJ, and then we're going to go to some questions.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do. Here's how I wrap my head around Atmos, and it's the simplest way. In the old days, you started with a mono speaker. Whether the speaker was to the left of you, then the sound came from the left. It was to the right of you, it came from the right. Then this thing called stereo hit, right? And they were able to do a little bit of magic, which is you put a stereo speaker on the left and one on the right, but the person mastering the sound can make it mostly left, but some right, and the sound moves back and forth and gives you a sound perspective. Take that concept and move it into a 360-degree circle with up, down, left, right, and everything else, and you have the essence of Atmos.
Right. And we want to make sure we say Atmos.
Yeah, I keep saying Atmos
because Atmos is very confusing. Atmos is a recording system or recording hardware, and Atmos is the audio. Go ahead, TJ.
One thing there's a lot of consumer confusion that I'm hearing from people,
right.
And one thing that is important to understand is these objects are decoded. The placement of the sound is done by your receiver or the device decoding the metadata from Dolby, and it's figuring out where the best position based on the available speakers you have. So if you've got a 5.1 system, it's going to figure out, well, I'm going to pump the sound into these speakers here because that's the best I can do. And if you've got 30 speakers, it's going to say, oh, I can get even more precise and pump sound into one speaker, perhaps, based on what you have available.
And in addition, when you move from stereo to 5.1 to 30 speakers, the sound just gets better. Like what you're not doing is having to buy a new version of it. They don't have to remix a new version because it being object oriented and essentially infinite resolution. It's kind of like, I always think in some ways I think of it as an EPS, or an Illustrator file of, it can keep on getting better depending on your printer. And in the same sense, both Vision and Atmos keep on getting better as your hardware improves. So you're buying, as a consumer, you're simply buying a better solution and it constantly getting a better experience. Greg and then Mickey.
Okay, my mute is acting up. But I think it's important to understand that in terms of films, the main track is still the bed.
Right.
Okay, and the conventional track. The objects flying around are the icing on the cake.
Right. Well,
Okay,
sometimes.
so if you had to pan every single piece of everything that you had in your mix, you'd be there for years.
Well, no, but I mean, I think that what I'm seeing in some movies that I've been watching recently is that they take on certain scenes where it makes a difference, where they want to tell a story, and they get very heavy-handed about the mix. Like, so they don't do it for the whole movie, but you'll see places where they really build this entire experience around you for an action scene or for some certain effect, that they bring in.
Right, but also don't underestimate the power of those two, the bed overhead channels.
Right.
Because I mean, we were doing this in the mid '80s at Disney for all the Circle Vision shows that were at the parks.
Right.
They had an overhead. It was a 10.1 system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Mickey?
Yeah, I think I'd like to respectfully disagree with Greg there, because for 7.1 or 5.1 deliverables, you still have to do a fold down from the height channel, so it's not a direct bed goes out as the 7.1 or 5.1 deliverable. They do a fold down.
Yeah, no. I wasn't implying that you just lose those channels.
Oh yeah. And also, like, for stereo deliverables and also other specialty deliverables that we have to do for narratives, like, say, we oftentimes have to do airline mixes, which is a mono mix, which is highly compressed. Those things aren't just a straight fold down from the Atmos render. Those are actual, like, specified, like, it's another mix pass just for those deliverables.
Right. Next question, or first question.
Charles Klein of New York City. Atomos with Resolve's Atomos Edition. What audio hardware should someone start researching? Dolby has told me 10 speaker minimum, and Genelec has told me Dante. Looking to learn some things.
Go ahead, Mickey.
So yeah, depending on what monitoring system you want to start out with, both like 5.14 or 7.12, those are all minimum of 10 speakers. In terms of other hardware, if your interface is capable of outputting those and you have a monitor controller that can control all those channels, or a lot of people have been using multiple smaller monitor controllers, that's what you would need. Dante, that makes things easier in terms of getting audio into all those speakers and routing it throughout your system, but it's not a requirement.
And the one thing to think about is also listening to it based on what you think your end client is going to listen to it for. Like, to get started, what I don't want people to be scared away from is, I have to have 10 speakers and I can't even start with Atmos if I don't. You can play stuff back on your phone with your AirPods and see what it sounds like. So you can design it and see and now you know what it sounds like on those AirPods. In those, in that environment, watching that video. And so think about previewing it. You may be building your first mixes for the AirPod Pro, not for a discrete system. Now, I think you can also look at soundbars. So that another in between is, because again, where most of your consumers are going to listen to it is in a soundbar or AirPods Pro. That's going to be 90% of your audience. So it's not going to 90% of your audience. Maybe I'm being conservative. It's probably 99% of your audience is going to be a stereo / soundbar / AirPods Pro as we get started, because that's what most people are going to have laying around. There aren't that many people I know that have that many discrete speakers, in their living room or other things like that. And so don't be afraid to start experimenting with this stuff and learning it inside of what you can afford at the moment to play with it, knowing that when you get serious, there's a long way you can go. You can buy a lot of speakers, you can buy a lot of devices and everything else. If you but you can get started with something very little, but then end up with, and again, these overhead, over the ear speaker headsets that Sennheiser and Sony make, you can put those on and hear basically what you're doing. Is it as good as the discrete speakers? Absolutely not. Is it good enough to get started and to start learning it? Absolutely. You know, and again, I don't want people to, I think there's such a huge opportunity right now to mostly serve the AirPod Pro market, that I think that people should, I would say I probably wouldn't use AirPods for my mix, but I'd figure out a way to do it through headsets that I can at least listen to. You know, but anyway, go ahead, Greg, and then TJ.
Yeah, I was just going to say there are a couple of smaller speaker-based systems that use these up-firing,
right,
or angled drivers on the top of them. And I heard one set, and it didn't sound bad. I mean, they bounce it off, but it's not the same, but it's fairly convincing.
Right, and back to what we were talking about before the show is even just some Apple HomePods, produce a relatively good way to start to preview it. Again, I'm not saying that that's all you should use, but you want to use what you have as you move forward. TJ and then Jason.
As we're talking about these numbers of speakers, you'll hear all these numbers, 5.1, 7.1, 7.1.4, just to let people know. The first number is the number of speakers that are around you at ear level. The .1 or .2 or whatever, that second dotted number is the number of subwoofers you have. And the third dotted number, so 7.1.4, the 4 is how many height speakers you have, or in-ceiling speakers.
Right. Yep, that's great. Jason?
I had those numbers backwards. I thought that upward firing was the second number. I guess I'm wrong there. But yeah, +1 on how impressive it is to, like, some sound bars absolutely sound fantastic. I know we tend to gravitate towards hardware snobbery, like on this panel, and I'm as bad as many, if not all. That said, there are some fantastic sound bars out there. And if you haven't heard the 16-inch MacBook Pro 2019 and later, the Atmos implementation is phenomenal. And that's just a laptop.
And again, even if you do end up getting discrete speakers or a high-end system, remember that you should be listening to them on the iPad and the AirPod Pro and the headphones, because that is, again, going to be somewhere between 90 and 99% of the listening audience that for your content. Go ahead, Mickey. And then Chris.
Yeah, I'm just curious because definitely with a consumer home theater setup and with the AirPods and devices like that, you can consume content that was produced in Atmos. But in terms of mixing, you would need to be able to send out an encoded Atmos stream to that end. I don't know how someone who doesn't have a more expensive setup would be able to encode the stream live from an app like, say, Resolve.
We'll have to take a look at that. Yeah, because I think that there is a way to do that, though, I believe. So we'll look at that. Go ahead, Chris.
Is there any way that, I know Apple is super secretive about stuff, but is there any way to estimate how many AirPod Pros they've actually sold? Does anybody know?
I do not know. I do not know how many.
At least one.
I don't.
Yeah, one,
2.
Mr.
I got 3. Yeah, we
sound off.
I will say that the difference between the AirPod Pros and the regular AirPods, I have both, and I hung out for a long time not getting the AirPod Pros, and that was a mistake. like they're so much better. Jesse and then Jason.
One of the distinctions that's important is what's been encoded as Dolby Atmos, AC4, digitized, data basically stream, and taking that, like Mickey said, out of Resolve, it doesn't really, I don't think, exist that way in Resolve. So you have to have a way to encode it. But that's just to say that if you're on a consumer setup, you're sort of staying in that format all the way through the pipe, and experimenting with setting up Alex's Atmos setup at the office. There was challenges of, are we can we take this over SDI? Can we embed? Can we de-embed? Where are we going to, monitor this? And looking at all of those different monitoring points on the stream, on the app, on the regular H.264, live stream and things like that. All of those were kind of touch points to look at the signal chain, the pipeline. But in the consumer world, it's all over HDMI, and you can't really get out of that HDMI world very easily. So,
Yep. Go ahead, Jason, and then Mickey, and then Greg.
There is I don't remember, I believe somebody mentioned it at one point on MacBreak Weekly. There is an enthusiast blog where a guy reverse engineers, Apple's sales disclosures. But to answer your question, no, these are not explicitly disclosed by Apple. We have some sense of it, but it all kind of falls under accessories when they do the earnings call. So no, we have no idea. That said, the AirPods Pro, I hated the AirPods. I had them, when people were looking for them for months, and I had them and they were terrible. They do not fit my ears. They never have. The AirPods Pro are fantastic. They are. I mean, they're not fantastic. They're not the best headphones, but they're the best of what they are.
Yep. Greg, and then Mickey.
Well, it looks like this Dolby Media Producer Suite software might encode it says it'll do it for Blu-ray, UHD, and OTT streaming.
Yeah, we'll do some research on that. I'm sure that there's a solution. We just need to figure it out. Mickey?
Yeah, Greg, that media producer software, I don't know if you recall, like back then, the Dolby SR units and all the mastering units from that back then, wherein each time you deliver something through that unit, you have to pay a licensing fee to Dolby. That's essentially what the counterpart is now. So they took control back, because when we switched to making just DCPs, wherein we could just deliver WAV files, PCM files, Dolby lost control of delivering audio files, delivering masters, print masters. But now with the producer suite, they took control back with that. Just going back to what Jesse was saying earlier, like even with the Resolve Atmos mixing, essentially what is outputted is just regular, just normal audio outputs that have been decoded through the built-in encoder/decoder in Resolve. So there's no way at the moment to get bitstream out, but I'm hoping that back then, like when we used to need to have to go through an AC3 encoder decoder, a company called Nayrink came out with a plugin that you can use in Pro Tools or whatever DAW that would essentially encode the audio stream within your DAW into an AC3 stream that you can then send out to like a consumer receiver. I'm hoping that Nayrink with AC4 releases a similar plugin so that we can monitor through the traditional consumer devices.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, that's what I thought this Dolby Media thing was.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg or Guy.
Yeah, I was just wondering from a consumer standpoint, how just walking into the local Best Buy and picking up like a Sony receiver would you recommend like a 7.2 and then the Apple TV 4K, which I already have that, and then just a 7.1 or 5.1 soundbar for the sub? I mean, because it seems like you can get in for $279 plus $699, so less than $1,000. You've got the 5.1.2.
I think the one we have in the office. I think the one we have in the office had, I felt like a couple discrete speakers, but it was, I think that it was about $800 is what we put in the office for up firing in the forward. Not for the AVR was, or no, it was all together. So it was the AVR is a separate thing for the discrete speakers, but for the sound bar that we have we have a second setup with a sound bar. And Jesse, didn't we have, I think we have two back speakers, right? In that, two wireless back speakers.
That one is just the up firing. It's just an LG sound bar and with the separate sub.
Right. And so that was just, there's at about somewhere, I think between $800 and $1,500, you start getting into these like discrete speakers a couple discrete speakers that you can put around that manage it. Go ahead, TJ.
Generally, you don't mix a receiver with a soundbar. You do either or. You'll do a soundbar or you'll do a receiver to do your distributed sound.
Right. We have a sound bar in one room and a receiver in the other. So that's I was just merging those two together while I was talking. But yeah, we have 10 discrete speakers in one room and then a sound bar in the other. And then headphones in my office. Next question.
Ken Jordan from London says the iOS 14.2 software update added the ability for a HomePod to stream Dolby Atmos audio from an Apple TV 4K. Has anybody heard or tested this? We're talking about that a little while ago.
TJ has.
I did this last night, actually, specifically for today. And I hooked up, now I have a home theater with Atmos with a big receiver. And so what I did is I took and pushed the audio to the HomePods, had a stereo pair set up, and played scenes from Blade Runner 2049, listened to the audio there, and then went back and compared it to the same scene in Atmos in my home theater. And well, obviously not as good. It was surprisingly impressive. I was getting sounds coming from behind me, and there's no speaker behind me. I don't know how they're doing this wizardry. And the height channel effects were subtle. If you really listen to them, you could kind of localize them, but it was really impressive.
So that might be, as a room, might be the easiest, least expensive, not maybe least expensive, but probably the best solution for under $500, right now, as far as that process goes. Jason and Mickey.
It's worth mentioning that a lot of people in this panel have taught themselves to listen critically. That is not something that anybody is bored with. You have to learn it and you have to practice it. At the end of the day, if you've never heard Atmos, it's going to be the best surround sound you've ever heard unless you've spent a lot of money in the past on surround sound.
Good. Mickey and then Guy.
Yeah, in terms of TJ being able to localize at least within the 2D space quite clearly, that's because with a lot of Atmos processing, like on the decoder, especially on the decoder side of things, on the consumer side of things, if they detect that it's not actually like a 514 or 712 or a proper like Atmos setup, they do binaural processing in the chain to simulate the positioning there. So that's why you're able to get the faux spatial recognition of where the sounds are coming from.
Good, Guy.
Yeah, I was just looking at the HomePods on the Best Buy site here, and when I tried Sonos, there was a delay, and it was just intolerable. So, is what's happening that the Apple TV is slowing down the video because the audio is too? Is there a connection there wirelessly now that's basically making the latency something that you don't notice with the HomePods? Is that where the control's happening, because the two devices can be in sync even though there's no wires?
TJ?
I don't know what magic they're using.
I believe the Apple TV has some sync, tools in it that it may be, doing to make that work. So that I think there is a buffer there somewhere that's doing some of that work.
Remember, it has that feature to listen, because that's
Right.
how it's doing voice commands, and that is incredibly accurate. As I think Alex has mentioned before, you can be playing loud rock music and say in a normal voice a command, and Siri will understand that. So it's got some way of bidirectional reading.
Yep. Yeah, that's part of what makes this interesting is you have speakers that have microphones in them, which is, so they can theoretically analyze that on their own to tighten that up.
So TJ, did it do a test where like on Zoom rooms, you actually hit a test button and it'll play tones and it'll calibrate the room? Actually, my Sonos does the same thing. It'll calibrate the room if you want. So did the HomePod ask you to do any calibration like that with tones?
No, what happens when you plug your HomePod in, it gives a little thum noise, and that noise is kind of the thing that's like, okay, it just kind of figures everything out. And if you actually pick it up and move it while it's playing other music, it'll realize, oh, I've been moved to a different location, and it will take the sound that it's playing and figure out the acoustics of the room.
It knows what its in and out is, so it's comparing what it's coming back into it based on what it's sending out, and so it can very quickly figure out what that the acoustics are. The white papers on the HomePod are a hard read. They're deep, but they're thinking pretty hard about this. You know, it's not, they didn't do, Apple doesn't do things that are easy. They do things that are hard, and the HomePod may look simple, but it is doing some really hard processing. Jesse and then Mickey.
And I think the HomePod and similar things are Bluetooth 5.0, which just be a audio snob for a minute and say it's still Bluetooth. So if you can run a cable to your speaker, that may be a better way to go.
Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that these technologies that we're currently talking about are not Atmos, are not related to Atmos. These are specific to Apple's products. And in terms of them dealing with the delays based on positioning of the HomePods, and also in terms of in terms of the delay between the Apple TV and the AirPods, that's the advantage of being in the same ecosystem. Apple is controlling all of these, both the source and also the speaker. So that's why they can do their Apple voodoo magic and not need the consumers to have to think about this. They're just doing it on their own.
Go ahead, TJ, and we'll move on.
And a final note is we're talking HomePod, the original here, not the HomePod Mini. The HomePod Mini will not participate in any of this Atmos effect at all.
No reindeer games for the HomePod Mini. All right, next question.
Ed Wilcock from Cottage Valley, New York, has popped in with Mickey and Greg. Do you see Atmos being implemented into live audio when live events come back? For example, in-ears for stage talent or in a theater. Spatial audio already exists for live, clang for ears, ISA for soundscape, for PA, but not widely used. Do you think that will change?
What I can say about that, while Mickey and Greg are thinking of their answers, is that it's a little complicated because a lot of the boards don't really support the height field. So it's not really an Atmos mix, but it is. There are ways to do it with multiple 5.1.4 mixes. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think in terms of using it for live, well, just looking at the history, like Dolby hasn't really dabbled in the in the concert space and the live space. So I don't, things could change, of course, but there's just no history of that at the moment. Yeah, definitely, spatial audio has been around in the live space for a while, and it has been done mainly with just making individual buses like for the heights and essentially building up the height mix or the surround mix on a regular console. But there's no encoding that is going on. And I don't know how much the latency of encoding to Atmos would also affect that, encoding and decoding.
If you look at Atmos music, though, Atmos for music, which we haven't really talked that much about, we're talking mostly about movies so far, but Atmos for music is really building instead of building a stereo track, you're building the music into Atmos. And I just find it to be amazing. There's not that many examples of it yet. We're seeing just little handfuls of stuff. If you're on Tidal, there's a couple playlists that are kind of hidden in Tidal. There's probably maybe 100 songs in there that show it. I think the difference between Atmos and stereo is much larger than the difference between stereo and mono. It is just this incredible, when they do it right, there's something about the presence of the main singer feels more in front of you because of this. The bed creates all the music and all around you done well defines this huge space that you're inside of, and it actually makes the singer feel more present than they do in a regular mix. It's a very interesting effect. I got to sit in a location that had about 80 speakers that they do a lot of surround mixes in, and we were watching a music video that had that in it, and I couldn't believe how much it felt like the singer is just floating right in front of me in a way that I didn't experience in regular stereo. Guy and then Mickey, and then Greg.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I went to go click to maybe buy an Apple HomePod, and look what happened. Be right back. We're making updates to the Apple Store, so Maybe
We're getting
we'll go see
close.
some new
We're
stuff.
getting
Don't
close.
click anything and buy right now.
Yep, exactly, Mickey.
That's a nice teaser. Yeah, I think what might be interesting for utilizing Atmos in the live world might be like, say, for playback tracks, or say if you're bringing in remote performers from another venue into another venue. That might be really interesting. But yeah, especially playback tracks, that might be nice to play with. Say, if you have a band up front, like say Metallica sometimes plays with an orchestra, and if you have the playback track of the orchestra like swimming around you while you have the band mix right in front of you, that might be really cool to play with.
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about with it is the possibility of putting interpretation tracks, people speaking other languages behind you. So you're watching it in front of you, but the Atmos mix could have because what happens like when we're working with I think of
the
like
true press box experience for those who have never been in a press box. That's exactly what it's like.
Well, sometimes you have translators and you have headphones and everything else, but I always think of it like when we worked in the Vatican, the Pope always has a person sitting right behind him, and just speaking in Spanish into his ear, and I've always thought that would be a really good effect of you're hearing all this stuff coming through, and then someone's like whispering in your ear. So like on one side you just hear in your language, you hear like a whisper of that person, so that I think your brain would separate that pretty well, where it would say, okay, I'm watching this, but someone's translating over here. And it would only work in your Atmos mix, or your surround mix, but it would be, but if you had that, we could sit there and give it to you as this little translation behind you. I think that would be a fascinating process. So Mickey, and then Chris, and then Greg.
Yeah, just on that, like Alex and Jesse, if you guys want to experiment, like let's.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm getting a bass track built so that we can do that. So anyway, Chris, and then
I totally agree about the perceived location of a sound. I do the same thing when I listen to calm in one ear and program in another.
Yep.
It helps your mind organize things.
Yep, absolutely. Greg, and then Ed.
And I think Mickey's right on target with the backing tracks. Or just any pre-records that go along with a concert experience. I think you could make a lot of use out of that.
I want to spread the stems live. so anyway, Ed.
Yeah, I mean, originally I was at first I was thinking about IEM mixes. Now with AirPods Pros being able to do Atmos, are artists going to be like, well, I want it to sound like it sounds like when I'm at home in my ears. But then I was thinking PA, because we do have things like Elisa and Soundscape where they're doing spatial audio in theaters. And yeah, I think music would be tough, but maybe a theater, like theatrical performances, like where they're doing rear channel speaker stuff anyway, and stuff overhead to kind of take your attention to somewhere else. But do you guys think that Atmos, because now it's going to be more commercially available and people are going to have it in their homes, is that going to drive the need for spatial audio pretty much everywhere we go, where we always want to be surrounded by audio on all sides?
That's why we're talking about it, is I think that's going to be a big deal. I think that the proliferation over the next year is going to be intense, and it won't happen immediately, but what's right behind that proliferation of capacity to distribute it is a demand for talent to do it. And so why I wanted to have these conversations both about vision and Atmos, and have us, and this is the beginning. This is not the 1 hour and that's it. This is the beginning of us, talking about this a lot. And the reason is that I can, I smell blood. I can smell it. It's off in the distance there, but I think that there is a lot of opportunity to find a lot for us as a group, and the power is that there's not that many people who do this, and the people who do it don't talk about it very much, because it's their little specialty that they do. And so the power is that if we all start learning it together, because I'm not going to say I'm the expert at it, but if we all learn it together as a group, what happens, what we've seen in the past, or what I've seen in the past with Pixel Core, is that when there's 50 or 100 or 150 of us that suddenly learn this as a group and come up and get all of that, now we have this core of knowledge between us that we're able to keep on we learn faster. Like we will continue to learn faster because all these answers, it's peer to peer. It's not us going to a class and then trying to figure it out on ourselves and then doing it. It's a peer to peer solution where we keep on discussing it. And I think that the demand could be so. What I have found in the past also is when there's not enough people to do it, the demand for that industry doesn't proliferate because it's too hard to get it done. Like for the clients, they can't find anybody to do it, or it's really, really expensive, or they have to wait for 3 months to have it posted. And so us all learning it together and doing it for lots of different clients is not going to mean that we're competing with each other. It's that we're going to expand the market where there's just more and more demand because more and more people are doing it. And I think that that's the advantage that we have as a group if we choose to go down that path. Greg and then Mickey real quick, and then we're going to kind of go into speed round. We got a lot of questions.
No, I just saw a little thing in the chat here about Clang, which apparently is a software that does do this for musicians for IEM. And I just personally, I would have a very, very steep learning curve before I could listen to that and actually play.
Yeah, me too. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, in terms of like how much these technologies will proliferate, like, think of back then the iMac with USB. I think this is that. Like, I think it started out with the iMac. Now USB is everywhere. I think with Atmos and Vision, it's starting off with being. It's currently starting to be standardized by Apple on all their new devices, and I think right now, for example, the standard consumer connection for displays is HDMI. I think for audio, I hope we're gonna step away from like mini jack and for consumers and go to a digital connection with Atmos. I hope it becomes that standard.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the advantages of wireless right now to an AirPod Pro is that they don't have to deal with a transport standard, to do that. They were able to redefine that connection, and so. But I do think that if we'd started earlier, that we'd be further ahead of the curve. But I don't think there was a lot of demand. I think next year is going to be this pivotal moment where people see Vision all the time and they see it they see it branded as Vision. They see the results of Vision, coming up, and I think that that's going to have a profound effect on what they think of, as well as Atmos. They're going to hear it. They're going to hear more and more content on their AirPod Pros, on their a lot of other things, and they're going to start. It doesn't happen immediately, but they start. When HD came out, a lot of people couldn't. My mother-in-law couldn't see the difference between HD and SD. It was like it all looked the same to her. But your eyes tune and your ears tune to what you see over and over and over again. And eventually they get to a point where you're like, huh. And again, it may not be something that people notice, like they don't know what it is, but it feels cheaper. Like if I look at a cheap film in previews on trailers, my kids know it's cheap. They can't tell you why. They can't tell you that the audio doesn't sound as complete. The lighting isn't as complete. There's a whole bunch of things that aren't as complete. They don't know why it is, but they think it's a cheap film. And they can tell the difference at 10 and 12 of a cheap film versus an expensive film. And it's not because of what they notice, it's what they feel. And I think that that's what we're going to, keep on having the opportunity to expand on. Okay, we're going to go into speed round. Next question. When I come to you on these next ones, be concise. We got a lot of questions that are stacking up. Next question.
Jonas Dattel, Reutlingen. For gaming, we use a TeamSpeak's alternative called Mumble, where every speaker was placed in the room so you could hear where in the game that person was. Is Atmos similar? And if so, could I use Mumble to have an audience that has a place and stream it through Atmos?
Similar idea. It's really interesting. But I don't know if you could use it for Atmos or not. But we'll keep thinking about that. That's I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with Mumble, but I do find that putting people in space helps a lot in figuring out who's talking when. Next question.
Alex, 4D Goldner from London, England. Does Atmos allow for room ambiances to be applied at playback?
Go ahead, TJ.
Generally, I found that faking out a room to sound different isn't part of the Atmos experience. It's part of what the receiver that you have will allow you to do.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, it's what you can do with that is kind of amazing. I've been in some theaters that feel reverby, and then they take the reverb out because the reverb was being generated by the speakers. Like it was literally microphones and speakers and the reverb. I can't say where I saw that, but it was it's kind of amazing. Like it feels like a big old theater, and then they turned it off and it was nothing. There was no reverb. Everything was, it was completely flat. But they were using the speakers and the microphones to rebuild the reverb in it. And it's I can't say that it's a Myers audio, Myers Constellation solution. Next question.
Also from Alex Goldner. If I position a bunch of speakers around a room in random positions and heights, if the AV receiver knows where they are, what direction they're pointing at, can it distribute the sound objects between them accurately?
TJ and then Jesse.
Sorry, generally you don't want to put them in a random location. However, if you have a receiver that has the ability to do a pink noise generator, it can detect where the speaker is, and it'll do micro adjustments to the sound delay between speakers.
Jesse and then Mickey, real quick.
The AVR will walk you through the different speaker placement options, and also Dolby has specifics on guiding you where to place the speakers within the room, and that's in the chat.
Mickey?
Chat.
That's great. Mickey?
Yeah, and some AVRs also have the ability to manually tune the angle of the speaker. So like they have angles that they recommend, but if the placement of your actual speaker is different, you can dial that in your AVR. I don't know about height, but in terms of horizontal angle, you can.
Next question.
Stuart from the panel often says, for sports production, is there hardware or guides from Dolby that'll record Dolby Atmos for live broadcast streaming?
There are some guides. I believe there's some guides for it. I mean, I think that a lot of what they're using the Atmos for that I've seen so far is crowd noise, putting up and around you, and having you feel like you're there. Mickey and then Stuart, real quick.
Yeah, for live productions, usually you run your mix through an EAC3 enhanced AC3 encoder or AC4 encoder.
Yep, Stuart.
Speaking directly to motorsport stuff, nobody wants to hear the crowd. In like the social media responses for the streams, they don't want it. Half of them don't want the commentator either. They just want to hear the engines, the tires. We've been discussing the same within chat, and I would wonder if there's any way to position mics around the place and give that sense of being there.
I think you definitely could. That would be really fun. Like big old engines and stuff going by. That would be a.
Or for baseball, being able to hear the ball tumble as it approaches you.
One of the things that well, and where you really see that is basketball. Like when we get we've had a full stem record or a full, not a record, but a delivery to us for surround. We've gotten, and there's 26 mics, coming to us from a basketball, one basketball, they're all over the place. And that's what you're hearing on basketball is this very complex. That's why you can hear the hoop, and everything else. But it's because it's an indoor controlled environment. You can put a lot more a lot more mics in there without it getting in the way. But yeah, 26 mics. Chris, real quick.
It's really fascinating at a basketball game watching them put up all the mics. They hide lobs at the net.
Yeah,
everything. Or baseball. Watching guys mix baseball where they pot up the bat swing so they can get the crack. They just ride it up, pull it down, ride it up. It's
and when you have the in football, the microphones are on the offensive guards on their shoulder pads. They're these tiny little mics that are under like a little cushion that's very carefully put. There's a whole team that just does the mics that do that so that you can hear blue 45. That's all being added by those two mics there. And anyway, next question.
James of Dublin says, most of what I've heard about Atmos today is movie-based. What about live events? Is it only big budget events that'll be able to achieve it?
No, it's definitely, I mean, where it has been is that, but a lot of what we're seeing coming is the ability to do this everywhere. I think that it's going to, over the next 2 years, I think you're going to see it being used it's going to go to average keynotes and all kinds of other things they're going to put it in because it's now available. There's going to be a huge market for it. There just wasn't a market to do it before. So why spend the money on it? But now with what Apple's doing specifically, we're going to see a lot more of it. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, we're talking, I think Greg and I are talking about Atmos in the theatrical film sense because it's been there the longest. It's been there since 2012, 2013. Although like in the past year or two, it's been starting to come out in a network broadcasts, and with the Dolby Summit a couple weeks ago, it is now starting in streaming. So it's just spreading out at the moment.
And if someone can put the Dolby Summit link in there, you can still go see those. They're not in Atmos and Vision, but you still can watch those videos, and I would highly recommend those sessions. They're pretty interesting. Next question.
Hasmic from the panel normally in Cape Town. I want to listen to Atmos today. In my possession, AirPod Pro plus iPhone 12 Pro and iPad Pro first generation do not have an Apple TV 4K. Which chain setup and which Netflix movie TV series should I immerse myself in?
Go ahead, TJ, and then Jason, real quick.
Your iPhone 12 and your AirPods Pro. As far as a thing to watch, I would just do a search on Netflix for Dolby Atmos.
Go ahead, Jason.
I find that Apple, when they're being showy, especially on the iPhone 12, use Apple TV Plus. Anything from Apple TV Plus will be spectacular. The one with Jason, what's his name, was spectacular.
Yep.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, and yeah, you can the movies that support Vision and Atmos are listed pretty prominently. So if you go to the movie on your phone or whatever, it'll tell you it's in Vision and Atmos, and that's where you're going to see it on your phone. Again, Tiny World I think is a pretty good one as an example. But there's Ava, which just came out, a little violent, but it's got some pretty good mix. And again, Blade Runner 2049 has got some good stuff in it. Mickey.
Yeah,
Chris,
I would
real
say
quick.
just specifically for the ear candy, I would suggest watching a bunch of Disney and the Pixar films, and also some of the Avengers films as well. Like just to experience, the sound.
The Pixar stuff is amazing. Like some of the stuff that they've done with that is just amazing. Even the short films are just really, they just go crazy. Chris.
Also, Ted Lasso is just a great story.
No, yeah.
Forget the tech. It's just people need to feel good right now.
Yeah.
Watch it. It's really great.
Next question.
Robert Pearson in McHenry, Illinois says several speaker manufacturers sell Atmos speakers that install on top of the front main speakers and point up to the ceiling. Is that really Atmos?
Go ahead, TJ.
Yes, it is. It is one of the approved methods to get the height channel.
Next question. We're going really fast now, so probably one person generally. Go ahead, next question.
Tony Mobley says, I have a Samsung 4K TV with AirPlay built in. Would Dolby Atmos work if I add speakers to this setup, or do I have to buy speakers in 4K Apple TV?
Jason?
Yes, technically, according to Apple, it will work. No, it's not the same thing. Whenever you have a TV, it's just no. Don't go there and don't expect to be wowed.
The compatibility of AirPlay 2 is still a little hit and miss. Next question.
Alex 4D, is Atmos really a delivery format? Are all objects sent to the playback system, or is it used to make various combinations of mixes for different systems, such as 714 or 24116?
My understanding is Atmos is delivered to the AVR, to whatever is your AVR, and then the AVR is as a Atmos. If it's Atmos certified, what it does is it takes that Atmos encode, it takes what it knows it has, and it splits it out as needed. Go ahead, Mickey.
Mickey. Yeah, I was just gonna agree to that. It gets all the channels, and the receiver says like, "Hey, I'm just a stereo system," and then Atmos is decoded to just stereo. It will scale with your system.
Yep. Next question.
Alex Olegnowitz in Toronto says, "What live encoders support Atmos and Vision?"
Elemental and ATEM are the only two, I think. Go ahead, Jason.
Nope, your answer was perfect.
Yep. Next question.
Stuart Fairweather in Melbourne says, and the panel, I have mates that hate all things surround sound. Yeah, I don't know why either. For those sorts of individuals, is there an option to turn off the surround while keeping the high quality reproduction?
Yeah, you just make it stereo. If you hook it to a stereo system, it'll come out as stereo. So it's, you don't have to have it. You just have a stereo system, and then you'll end up with stereo. A really good stereo, Mickey.
Yeah, exactly. Like even if you have an Atmos AVR, if you set it to just stereo, then it'll decode in stereo.
Yep. Next question.
Tim Turner in Eagle, Wisconsin says, what makes the soundbar unique within Atmos? I came in late and this may have been answered. If so, let me know in the chat.
TJ?
An Atmos compatible soundbar will have speakers that are directional and pointing towards the ceiling, as opposed to a normal soundbar.
Next question.
James Badgett says, is there any interest in having a project for each of us to produce an audio clip with Atmos? Excuse me. Got to get that Z out of there.
Coming soon. Absolutely. Like having us all, you'll find that the first thing we're going to do is you got to learn the basics of how to use it, how to use probably Resolve, in that sense, and how we're going to get it out and how we're going to preview it and how we're going to distribute it to each other to listen to. But then what I'm a big fan of is we all get common resources. So whether it's recorded or we pick sound effects or we, do something, we basically all get the same resources. And we all work on the same thing together. And it's, in my opinion, one of the fastest ways to learn is for us to, and then because then we're trading notes where apples are apples and oranges are oranges. And we can, say, well, this is how I use the same thing. So a highly constrained training process is super efficient. And so you can definitely expect that over the next couple of months. The first step we're going to do is get everybody on, between Logic and Resolve and, a couple other things we're going to, play with getting everybody up to speed so they know how to do it. And then we'll figure out what assets we distribute to everybody. And then we'll spend probably Saturday afternoons talking about it and trying to figure it out. Next question.
Jonas Stuttel, would something like the second ears experience we do here profit from Atmos, where the main audio is placed in front of the second hour office hours and the second hour office hours behind? Would that help in understanding both?
Mickey?
Yeah, that would be really cool. Although I think it might sound cooler if the office hours audio is coming in from above. One advantage though that we have as people that are pushing the boundaries and being first here and also being people that are doing streaming is that we have the freedom to decide on this, because traditional networks won't allow you to play around that much. They want dialogue dead center or center and a bit on the left and right. One advantage that we have being streamers is that we can control our own mixes. We don't have guidelines that we need to follow.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the thing is us, A, trading notes, B, being able to fully experiment, and then, really preparing, I think, can get us to a place where we as a group are further along than almost anybody else. If we focus on it, it's just a matter of it's up to us to push that envelope forward. Next question.
And our last question of the day, Roscoe Jones from the panel says, if we did Atmos for office hours, who gets put on the back speakers? I'll go there for now. Is it the equivalent of the British Parliament's backbenchers? Is that
that would be fun. That's great. Yeah, we'll work on that. Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
I was just thinking of what it would sound like if we could have some sort of mic rig on a helmet of all things for a driver to walk up, sit in a Formula One car or something similar and drive and have that noise actually behind you as you're watching a camera on the dashboard.
That'd be fun.
The potential is outstanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason?
I can almost guarantee it's been done.
We've played a lot with headset mics, and all kinds of things there. There's Sennheiser actually makes a pair of headphones that are binaural that can, record that, which could be a good place to start. Mickey?
Yeah, well, it's been done to an extent with traditional 5.1 mixes for broadcast, not on the helmet of the driver, but discrete mics like placed in the engine bay, placed near the exhaust, and also in the cab. So it would be cool to do it in Atmos as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So hopefully that was useful. That got us, I think we answered a lot of questions. I think got a lot of people kind of up to speed, at least at the beginning. So, we're going to work on expanding our understanding of that and playing with it further in the coming weeks and months. We'll try to bring some other experts in to talk about it. And I just this one was mostly just getting us on the playing field. So we kind of get our basic questions handled, and we'll keep on expanding from there. One thing, so tomorrow we'll do the same thing we're doing today, but we'll be talking about vision and HDR and understanding what that means and what it is. Again, I would highly recommend looking at some of the Dolby Summit stuff that was done in the past, but we'll put up some more resources, but we want to get people their head around it. Again, this is a huge opportunity for us as a group that's unique, that I think that we can take advantage of. Also, real quick, I have a request for anybody who's game for a couple minutes. I need to test meeting rooms. We're doing an event with meetings, and I don't do that very often. So so anyway, we're going to do some breakout rooms testing right after this. So in the next minute or so. And so I'm going to put the link in. If anyone wants to jump into that, it would just help us to have a bunch of, you don't need to do anything. It's just going to be jump in and let us figure out what's going on. We just needed a bunch of people. So if you're interested in that, the link is in Mukana. I'm gonna go ahead and drop out of this one and open that one up right after it. And I'd love to see a couple of you there if you're willing to play. But thank you so much for that, and thank you for a great conversation. I think we all learned a lot really fast, and that's the power of what we're doing here. So thanks everyone. Thanks for great questions and great answers to the panel. So anyway, we'll see you all tomorrow. We'll